They called her the left-behind wife. They flew to Maui, got married, toasted with crystal champagne flutes, and sent her a photo in the middle of the night just to watch her break. Her husband, her business partner, the two people who had sat inside her boardroom, earned her trust, and built their futures using her name. They expected devastation. They expected her world to collapse. What they got instead was Scarlett Ross, a woman who had spent 7 months building a file they never knew existed, a woman who had already survived hurricanes, floods, and ash, and had no intention of being buried by two people she had personally elevated. The lesson this story leaves behind is one of the most powerful you will ever hear. The woman who rebuilds disaster for a living cannot be destroyed by people who have never built anything themselves. Hit the like button right now if this already has your full attention. Leave a comment, share this with someone who refuses to be underestimated, and subscribe because this channel is exactly where stories like this one belong. This content was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team to bring you stories with genuine meaning and lasting lessons.
I saw the photo pop up on Sabine Reed's monitor, her and Julian Croft clinking champagne glasses against a sunrise. Her text to Ms. Vance was brutally efficient. Later, an email arrived from Eleanor Vance for me to forward. One word: stunning. A polar vortex swept through the office. Sabine smirked, convinced she'd won. She saw it as a hostile takeover, not an emotional exit. She'd studied the architect, Eleanor Vance, but never truly understood the system I knew she was. I managed Eleanor's calendar. Apex Recovery was her entire world. Julian was a charming piece of public relations she'd acquired. His contracts were filed under marketing, not partnerships. She built this empire from nothing, a fortress of pure will. I watched Sabine probe its defenses for 2 years, looking for the one crack she could exploit. I typed the transcripts of Eleanor's early interviews, the stories of the old Ford pickup and dinners from a can. Sabine saw that relentless focus as a bug, not a feature. Sabine Reed is a master of corporate architecture. She could spot a flaw in a balance sheet from a mile away, except, I realized, the one sitting at my desk. I am Tessa Mitchell, her executive assistant, her witness. People say Julian Croft is charming. I saw him as a tool Eleanor deployed to soften the company's image. For Sabine, he was a key variable to manipulate. I was the one who formatted Sabine's ruthless efficiency plans. She was the logic that sharpened Eleanor's vision. But I always sensed her strategy served a different endgame. I remember the day Sabine started, a prodigy of cold, hard analytics. Eleanor saw a priceless asset. Julian saw a fellow conspirator. I saw the beginning of the end. Their alliance was built on risk analysis. I booked their off-site meetings. Julian's access to Eleanor was the initial investment for their calculated merger. That photograph wasn't a confession. It was their opening statement. The Maui lanai was the new boardroom, and I was the one who had to pretend I didn't see the declaration of war. In the photo, Julian looked like a man in charge because Sabine had allowed him to think he was. Her smile wasn't joy. It was the cold satisfaction of a profitable transaction. In the hallways, I heard them whisper about the irrational queen. They saw themselves as the logical successors, and they believed a sharp, emotional blow would guarantee her surrender. But Eleanor's one-word reply wasn't on their flowchart. I saw a flicker of doubt cross Sabine's face for the first time. It was a system error in her perfect plan. I knew Eleanor wasn't seeing a cheating husband. She was seeing an opponent's opening move, calmly logging the data points with that unnerving focus of hers. I brought Eleanor her 4 p.m. tea, and she was reviewing quarterly reports as if nothing had happened. The implication was terrifying. For her, this battle had begun long ago. I overheard Sabine assure Julian that Eleanor would crumble. Their plan required it. But I've seen Eleanor handle market crashes and federal inquests. She doesn't crumble. She regroups. Their affair was a tactical maneuver. The hushed calls I pretended not to hear, the travel itineraries I booked. They thought they were running a secret op. They were performing for an audience of one. Sabine sent the text at 11:43 p.m. Eleanor's time, a detail chosen for maximum impact. I knew Eleanor lives for the details. She would see the strategy, not the insult. The confident air of their coup had evaporated. Now, a heavy silence filled the space between their offices. Their precision strike felt less like a victory and more like they'd walked straight into a trap. They were counting on a meltdown. The entire play was designed to shatter her composure. They bet on her being a woman first, a CEO second, a fatal miscalculation. They needed her to appear volatile for the board. They wanted the weeping, betrayed founder. Instead, they got silence. They got a ghost in the machine. They thought that picture was the end of the story. I was beginning to realize she saw it as the official mission start time. 13 years ago, she started this company in a sweltering warehouse. That place hard-coded her for survival. She isn't designed to be broken. Sentiment is a fatal bug, she'd said in a meeting I took minutes for. At some point, I realized she began applying that cold protocol to the two people closest to her. Apex became the industry's last resort. When a system truly failed, they didn't call for consultants. They called my boss. That power required sacrifice. By the time the company was valued in the billions, her humanity was running on a closed loop. There was no bandwidth left for Julian. I found the file on his background check. She was 33 when he gained her trust, brilliant, isolated, and always, I now see, running threat assessments on everyone. They met at a charity gala. I saw the pictures. She looked like a general in an evening gown. He made her laugh, and for a split second, her firewall dropped. He got past her defenses, introducing a chaotic human element to her life. He thought he was saving the woman. He never understood she commanded the machine. Then Apex scaled too quickly. The chaos was winning, and then Sabine appeared. Eleanor saw her as a system upgrade. I saw her as a Trojan horse. I watched Sabine streamline a logistics disaster in 20 minutes flat. She spoke the only language Eleanor still fully trusted. Absolute sterile competence. She was close to burning out. She made Sabine COO. I saw the gratitude on Eleanor's face, and I knew it was the most dangerous vulnerability she had ever exposed. Now I see it clearly. She was so relieved to have Julian's warmth and Sabine's precision that she forgot to be paranoid. She lowered her shields. She gave them the kingdom. Julian took over client relations. Sabine got full admin access to the servers. I processed the paperwork that handed them the weapons. I was the one who routed the memo giving Sabine signature authority, unfettered operational control. They thought Eleanor was checked out. I suspected she was setting a honeypot. She didn't just give them the key to the server room. She built it around them, then sat back to watch the security monitors and see exactly what they would do. The way they angled their laptops, the sudden use of encrypted chats. They thought they were hiding an affair. They were just creating a data trail for her. A 3-day trip to Ohio to assess a high school server. The expense report was absurd. I filed it. When Eleanor casually asked about it, her eyes told me she knew. Then came the board meetings I wasn't asked to schedule, the sudden quiet when I'd deliver water to Sabine's office. They thought they were seizing control. She was gathering evidence. Eleanor would look at Sabine and ask about her ambitions, framing them as insecurities just to watch her react. It was never about Julian. It was always a quiet war between them. The air in the office crackled, but the knot in my stomach wasn't from their thrilling takeover. It was from the cold dread of what I knew was coming. Sabine adopted Eleanor's creed. Sentiment is a liability. She was so blinded by the prize that she ignored the biggest variable in the entire system, me. Then came the cold morning order from Sabine. Tessa purged the Nightingale compliance folders, all of them. My phone buzzed. A private number. 2 words from Eleanor. Do not. I didn't just refuse the order, I made a copy. They used his heart and her trust to steal the kingdom she built. But they made the one mistake that unravels every conspiracy. They underestimated the person who knows where all the bodies are buried. For 2 years, I watched Julian Croft study Catherine Sterling. It wasn't admiration. It was assessment. His loyalty was a mask, and I saw the first crack in a single-line item I wasn't supposed to question. He processed a vendor payment himself one night, a small irregularity he assumed I'd miss. It felt less like work and more like him testing the locks on a house he planned to rob. Summit Strategic Group. I overheard the name on a hushed phone call. The company was a ghost, but it received $50,000. I made a copy of the wire transfer confirmation. There was no paper. I knew because I managed all the paper. It was a digital phantom, a trail of breadcrumbs he'd laid to lead everyone, especially her, down the wrong path. He used Leo Vance from marketing, a kid so eager to impress he'd sign anything. I saw the authorization for a campaign that never existed. Leo was the first casualty. Leo couldn't approve a box of pens. Julian used that boy's digital request and applied Catherine's own authority. He was turning the key she had given him, unlocking doors he had no right to open. While the executives discussed vision from 30,000 feet, I saw him building a secret passage in the company's financial bedrock. Power isn't in the sky. It's in the details no one else bothers to read. This was more than theft. It was character assassination. I glimpsed the booking confirmation on his monitor. It was a piece of bait designed to emotionally cripple her before the final push. A villa, Hawaii, for two. The confirmation was sent to an old account of hers, a ghost designed to haunt her from inside her own home. It was an act of profound cruelty. He scheduled it to conflict with a conference I knew she had to attend. I remember him feigning concern in her office, urging her to stay. Every detail was a sharpened blade. When she found out, I saw no tears, just a quiet, dangerous stillness in her eyes, the kind that precedes a storm. He mistook her silence for surrender. Her first call was to Isabel Thorne, the lawyer. Her voice was flat, cold iron. Julian smirked when I patched the call through, thinking she was reacting just as he'd predicted. Then Marcus Cole, the forensic accountant, arrived. Julian had already prepared the trail for him, a sordid little story of infidelity and greed starring an innocent young man. For 7 months, I brought coffee to a predator and scheduled meetings for the woman he was stalking. I was the silent witness to a slow, methodical poisoning of everything she'd built. I knew Marcus was mirroring the servers, and Julian knew it too. Every file he opened was a performance, painting himself as a rogue for an audience of one. The money was a clever trick. The real coup was in the corporate bylaws he had me prepare. He was rewriting the rules of the kingdom while everyone was chasing the court jester. He was building a legal cage, using Leo's digital footprints to frame a conspiracy. The poor boy's server access logs read like a confession to a crime he didn't understand. Leo's job was to make things pretty. His digital presence in the company's financial core was an absurdity so loud it had to be a carefully constructed lie. Julian's lie. She was building a file she called contingency. He assumed it was for her defense. He never imagined she was assembling the evidence for his prosecution. He called it espionage when talking to his lawyers. The trip to Hawaii wasn't an affair. It was the staging ground for a corporate takeover. I filed the expense reports for his strategy sessions. To him, it wasn't personal. It was systematic. Catherine Sterling was an obstacle on a flowchart, an unfortunate variable that needed to be removed. The affair, the villa, the lies, it was all misdirection. His war room was a paradise suite, paid for with her money. The arrogance of it left me breathless. He saw her trust as a tool he could exploit. He never realized it was a test he had been failing for 3 years. From my desk, I saw the time on his screen. 11:45 p.m. An email to the chairman was open. The smiling photo from Hawaii ready to deploy. 1 minute until he planned to ruin her. I watched his face suffused with the placid calm of a man who believed he was a god. He clicked to send. A red banner appeared. Access denied. The first crack in his perfect world. A sudden, impossible error in his divine math. He tried other systems. Contracts, financials, blocked. His entire digital existence had been surgically excised from the company. It was as if he had never been there. His authority was gone. Erased. I saw the cold dread dawn on his face when he realized what had happened to the money. He scrambled for the Treasury portal. A new protocol was in place. A hardware security key was now mandatory. He didn't have one. Any wire over $25,000 now needed her biometric scan and a counter-signature from Isabel Thorne's office. The vault was sealed. His coup was stranded, a beached whale. His power vanished. Then Catherine's counterattack became brutally personal. A text from Leo flashed on his screen, locked out. She was methodically dismembering his operation, but this wasn't just strategy, it was retribution. I booked Leo's corporate apartment myself. It was in Catherine's name. His frantic texts confirmed it. His key card was dead. She had evicted Julian's pawn. She wiped his access, changed the locks. In the space of 5 minutes, Leo Vance was not just jobless, he was homeless. Julian's assets were being liquidated. Then came the system-wide alert I had helped Catherine draft at 2 a.m. that morning, an enterprise-wide legal hold. His own checkmate turned against him. Every server was frozen in time. The crime scene was sealed, but the narrative belonged to her now. He couldn't delete his plan. The evidence was preserved in digital amber. A board meeting alert chimed on his phone. He had been summoned. Then, a text from Catherine's personal phone. 2 words. It's done. It was the clean, quiet sound of a guillotine blade. Simultaneously, her email landed, addressed to the board, with Julian copied. It was a masterpiece of devastatingly polite corporate language. Conflict of interest. Material threat to the company. She was dismantling him with his own vocabulary. She had been one step ahead the entire time. His phone lit up, a wildfire of calls from the board. In the reflection, I saw my own face, the invisible woman who had watched the invisible war. The champagne sat flat. There would be no more words, only lawyers. The glass was a monument to an arrogance so profound it had become a fatal blindness. Every piece of his grand strategy was now an exhibit for the prosecution. He was no longer a predator, just prey, trapped in the warm air of his own doomed paradise. The resort lights sparkled below him. Thousands of miles away, I was executing the final deletion commands, erasing his world, keystroke by keystroke. He misread her completely. He saw a queen and never bothered to look for the assassin she kept hidden in plain sight. This was never his story. It was always hers. The summons arrived at 3 a.m. I saw the calendar alert bloom on my screen. Phase 1 had begun. The agenda was a corporate eulogy, making Eleanor Vance an honorary founder. My job was to pretend it was an honor. Mr. Croft's part was perfect. I saw the wedding photos hit the feeds, a tidal wave of manufactured joy. Their story was brutally simple. A new, stable leadership against a founder lost in emotional chaos. While Ms. Thorne rehearsed her speech, I watched her screen, saw her monitoring Ms. Vance's call logs. She was calling our biggest clients, trying to patch a sinking ship. I could almost feel the desperation through the screen, like trying to fight a wildfire with a glass of water. At 3:30, their video call began, champagne just out of frame. The board members looked like they were at a funeral. Then Ms. Thorne appeared, tanned and predatory. Then, Eleanor Vance. She wasn't broken. She was a mountain in a charcoal blazer. A cold knot formed in my gut. I watched Ms. Thorne ignore it, launching into her script. Eleanor is in crisis, she purred with false sympathy. Her capacity to lead is compromised, she went on. For the company's protection, a leave of absence is required. The firm cannot be exposed. I will step in as acting CEO. A silence. Then Ms. Vance's voice, like ice. Have you finished? Before she could answer, a new face I didn't recognize. Good morning. I am Isabel Reed, personal counsel to the founder. As the chairman started to speak, Ms. Reed cut him off. Before this illegitimate vote, I direct you to Article 4. The founder's written approval was needed. The board was powerless. You lack the authority for this vote, Avery. The trap snapped shut. She's not well, Ms. Thorne stammered, her composure cracking. A new voice. The instability is in your books. A flowchart filled the screen. My name is David Chen, independent auditor. I found irregularities from the COO's office. He was surgically precise, pointing to consulting fees. Unauthorized payments to a shell corp, fast-tracked by Ms. Thorne. Furthermore, he said into the ringing silence, a catastrophic conflict of interest, a material breach of her contract. Ms. Thorne, the chairman's voice was arctic, are you operating a slush fund? It's a lie, she shrieked. A setup. Eleanor Vance leaned forward. I didn't need to be vindictive, Avery. I just needed to do my job. You assumed I'd be too busy crying. The end was swift. Motion dismissed. The COO's access is frozen. You are suspended, Miss Thorne. You are to speak with no one. The call blinked out. The morning light felt frigid. I finally understood the terrifying genius of her plan. It was never about the affair. Mr. Croft's staged happiness was the cheese in the mousetrap, making them reveal their hand. She let us believe she was a victim, blinded by our own hubris as she built the gallows. At 10 that night, my burner phone buzzed. I expected a lawyer. It was an encrypted number, a single panicked message from a woman ordered to shred evidence. The sender was me, Tessa Mitchell, the ghost in the machine. The furniture that was never supposed to have a spine. I booked their flights. I filed those very expense reports. I was a function, a tool, but the tool chose to think. I would never have gone to Ms. Thorne. I knew with a certainty that chilled my bones who I had to message, Eleanor Vance. I can still see her reply, not reassurance, just the address of a law firm where my fear would be weaponized. I remember sitting in that sterile room, the flash drive in my bag feeling like a lead weight, enough to send them to prison. My hands were shaking. I can still hear Ms. Vance's voice, a calm island in my terror, promising me I would be safe. And I told them everything. I gave them every detail. I told them how Ms. Thorne had called, screaming, ordering me to delete it all. In her panic, she gave an order assuming I was too small to disobey. A fatal miscalculation about the person who handled her secrets. But I didn't delete it. I copied everything. And now Ms. Vance had the entire conspiracy on a secure server in her lawyer's office. Every chat log, every falsified invoice, and the presentation, their arrogant, self-incriminating presentation. They called it phase shift. I had formatted that presentation. The Maui trip wasn't a celebration, it was an indictment. The wedding photo was labeled a psychological trigger. To take down Eleanor Vance, they didn't need a corporate raid. They just needed a picture. While he broke her heart, she managed the fallout. She called them aggressive vendor commissions, payments I processed, a slush fund for deals Ms. Vance was too ethical to make. They thought it was chess. The plan was a masterpiece of cruelty. Ms. Thorne handled the board. Mr. Croft handled the emotional vivisection. They never thought I'd find the audio file. I remember when Mr. Croft sent it, the thrill in his chat message, a strategic analysis from the man who shared her bed, a perfect weapon. His words were so cold, so clinical. She won't get angry at the photo, he'd typed. She's too composed. I know her tells. He was an expert in her pain. She will go quiet, he predicted. By the time she processes it, we will have control. It was a monument to their arrogance, mistaking her trauma for weakness. The CEO in her could withstand a corporate attack. But the wife? That recording, played for her by her lawyer, was the blade she never saw coming. He had mapped her deepest fears, her dread of public humiliation, her instinct for silence under fire, and given them to Ms. Thorne as a blueprint for her destruction. I watched Ms. Reed absorb the truth. Her breathing steadied, a fortress door locking inside her. Then her gaze found me, Tessa Mitchell, the assistant who brought her the proof, my hands trembling. Arthur Sterling, the man I worked for, and Amelia Vance, the woman he conspired with, were predators. And me, the girl they never saw, had just risked my entire career on basic human decency. I can still see Ms. Reed's lawyer, Eleanor Grant, sliding a document across the table, a federal whistleblower agreement. It was a shield for the one person they never imagined had a voice. They can't hurt you, Eleanor said. Then Ms. Reed's voice, sharp and clear. You don't work for him anymore. You work for me. In that moment, the most overlooked woman in the company became the one person who could save it. I knew then they were in Maui, toasting the success of their treachery. Their attack began in the media, a theater where feelings trump facts. By Tuesday, I heard Mr. Sterling's voice on a podcast. His sincerity so perfectly false, it made me sick. He painted Ms. Reed as a volatile genius who had lost her touch. He claimed their partnership soured, that he had to break away, a well-rehearsed fiction. He was the heroic innovator. She was the tyrant. At the same time, Mr. Sterling's picture appeared on a business magazine, a triumph of calculated deception. The story omitted his affair, erased the fraud, and twisted his betrayal into a noble act. We weren't criminals, the story implied. We were saviors. They called a hostile, illegal takeover a corporate rescue, and for a short time, the world believed them. The market cheered. Their investors were pleased. They controlled the story. Everyone expected Ms. Reed to fight back with press releases and angry denials. She was supposed to play the part of the humiliated founder, fighting for her reputation. She refused the role. Her silence was a weapon. It was the first sign their plan was failing. They were yelling at a wall, not realizing it was a mirror. They mistook her silence for defeat. It was ammunition being loaded. While they courted journalists, her lawyer assembled the facts I had given her into 3 separate files. The first packet was delivered to the board. It was a timeline, not a story. Cold proof that Mr. Sterling's affair with Miss Vance was over a year old, a detail they had carefully hidden. It laid their hotel bills next to the dates of board meetings where they'd approved budgets together. It wasn't about romance. It was a flagrant breach of fiduciary duty. The second file destroyed their narrative. It held the complete financial trail from our vendors, tracked by an analyst named Ethan Cole, straight into a shell company, Blue Harbor Consulting. It included the 6-figure wire for their Maui villa deposit. It accounted for every single dollar they stole to pay for their victory celebration. Their special projects fund was just a ledger of their theft. The third file was for the Department of Justice. I hadn't just spoken up. I had copied the entire server. My file had the server logs with unchangeable timestamps, showing Mr. Sterling desperately altering contracts after the board suspended him. A digital confession. This wasn't a corporate squabble anymore. This was tampering with federal evidence. The world they built didn't just crack, it ceased to exist. In 24 hours, the financial collapse was swift. 2 school systems, clients holding 8-figure contracts, suspended every project Mr. Sterling managed. Their story was dead. An insurance company froze an escrow payment for a hospital wing, citing a morals clause and demanding an audit. The money stopped. The allies vanished. The board, fearing lawsuits, cut them off from the company with breathtaking speed. They thought they were fighting a PR war against a scorned woman. They truly believed charisma and a fabricated story were enough. But as the federal subpoenas started arriving, the truth became painfully clear. She wasn't fighting with emotion. She was taking their world apart with the cold, undeniable power of proof. They learned that a podcast interview is no match for a time-stamped server log. But the true horror wasn't the fraud. It was never just the fake invoices or the embezzled money. The real poison was in the quiet, personal violations. On Mr. Sterling's laptop, they found the evidence. Ms. Vance wasn't just his partner. She had been his spy in Ms. Reed's office. For 18 months, she had betrayed every confidence, every private moment. She took pictures of Ms. Reed's personal journals, her confidential strategy notes, and she stole the encrypted voice recorder from her desk, a device I'd seen Ms. Reed use for private thoughts. 5 years of audio diaries, private thoughts recorded on the advice of a therapist, her most vulnerable fears about her work. Ms. Vance stole them all. She handed her soul to the enemy. She gave Mr. Sterling every password, every weakness. It was the hostile takeover of a person's spirit, and Ms. Vance provided the access. I read the emails where they planned it over dinner. They mapped her psychology, searching for the exact pressure point that would make her break. They targeted her known trauma responses. They knew she would retreat and avoid a public battle. Their plan was flawless. One photo from their Maui trip, leaked to the press, would make her collapse. But Mr. Sterling, ever the strategist, had a backup plan. A perfectly forged whistleblower complaint was saved on my old work drive, a file I was supposed to have deleted. It was filled with fabricated charges against Ms. Reed. The Charleston Hospital contract was their masterpiece, a fake claim which Ms. Vance helped write, accusing Ms. Reed of rigging the bid. It was designed for character assassination. Mr. Sterling's plan was to frame Miss Reed so perfectly that she would have to resign to save the company she loved. They just needed one emotional outburst from her to trigger their trap. Ms. Reed would have lost everything: her company, her reputation, and her closest friend. I remember the cold feeling I got when I first read their plan. It was pure evil. I saw the travel confirmations for their return from Maui. They must have been waiting for the news to break, for her public humiliation. A perfect ending to their cinematic betrayal. I imagined them thinking she was at her desk, defeated. The affair was a common wound. That part was almost incidental to them. The real cruelty was how Ms. Vance used their friendship against her. She was the one who knew all of Ms. Reed's secrets. She turned every vulnerability into a weapon. She knew every weak spot. She directed Mr. Sterling's attacks to the most sensitive places. They thought she would be broken by the person she trusted most. It was monstrous, but to them, necessary. But as the hours ticked by in their Maui suite, the news they expected never broke. The silence from our office was complete. Their confidence must have turned into a quiet, chilling dread. The self-doubt they had counted on. Was I not enough? Did I fail? Was the foundation of their attack. They needed her to destroy herself. Her silence was not in their script. It must have felt wrong. A terrible miscalculation. A new, sharper question must have formed in Ms. Vance's mind. Why did I let him compromise my perfect plan? She must have looked in the mirror and seen a stranger. Her alliance with Mr. Sterling was supposed to be a partnership, but I wondered if she realized what she had broken in herself. I'm sure she told herself that guilt was a waste of time, but as I sat with Eleanor Grant, finalizing my statement, I knew their silence wasn't a victory. It was an ambush. For 2 years, I watched Isabel Thorne study my boss, Eleanor Vance, like a biologist mapping a specimen. She was cataloging vulnerabilities. It was never about Julian Croft, her new husband. It was about power. As I served them champagne, I saw the certainty in her eyes. She believed the company was already hers. After her takeover announcement, Eleanor's silence was unnerving. Julian grew frantic, and then I saw the first panicked email flicker across his screen from their lawyer. Their offer was a quiet execution. Eleanor would resign, forfeit everything, and they wouldn't expose the Pacific Ridge accounting fraud they'd discovered. Our counsel, Ms. Davies, sent a one-word reply: no. I saw Julian's face go pale. From my desk, I felt a flicker of hope. It was a move they hadn't predicted. They thought she was trapped. The data seemed absolute. Revealing the fraud would ruin her. I saw the cold confusion in Isabel's eyes. Her target wasn't following the script. 4 hours later, the formal cease and desist arrived. The smug tone from Isabel's morning directives suddenly felt hollow, premature. I watched Julian unravel. He messaged Eleanor directly, a desperate plea to a past Isabel had twisted into a weapon. The predator was becoming prey. He begged. Then he blamed Isabel, casting himself as her pawn. It was a pathetic, transparent pivot. I saw the flurry of his typing, a man digging his own grave. He tried to paint himself the victim. It was absurd. His frantic texts were a cascade of errors, each one a gift to Eleanor's legal team. Within the hour, Ms. Davies filed his texts as attempted witness tampering. His desperate emotional spiral was now Exhibit B in the case against his own wife. Then our accountant, Mr. Chen, found it all, $2.4 million. He unspooled Isabel's Pacific Ridge scheme as if he had a map. He did. I gave it to him. The condo, the lavish wedding, her entire legal fund, all paid for by siphoning capital from our own company. She had used our money to finance her attack. It was flawlessly executed. The morning she ordered me to delete the compliance records, a cold dread filled me. I looked at the order, then at my screen, and I chose not to obey. They barely knew my name. I was the ghost who ordered their lunches. But I calmly testified that I had overheard everything, and I had the logs to prove it. I repeated her words verbatim. Her goal was to ensure Eleanor walks into the room bleeding out. A crude phrase I'd typed into my daily log, capturing the cold brutality of her plan. My testimony transformed her strategy from a ruthless affair into premeditated corporate sabotage. The chairman, Mr. Albright, saw the ledgers, heard her words, and called for an immediate termination hearing. Emergency arbitration was set for 9 the next morning. No appeals. A corporate trial by fire. Isabel's 48-hour timeline had just been reduced to 12. That evening, I saw them through the window of their hotel suite. Her supreme confidence was gone, replaced by the grim knowledge that she was fighting blind. I imagined the silence between them as she wiped their devices clean. It was no longer a strategic quiet, but the heavy air of a mission that had catastrophically failed. Eleanor wasn't fighting a heartbroken wife. She was facing an opponent who had used Isabel's own arrogance as the blueprint for her downfall. The arbitration room was built for clean corporate executions. I watched them walk in, flanked by lawyers, their faces tight. They were completely outmaneuvered. Eleanor arrived last. She wore a simple black dress, the picture of calm authority. Her eyes met Isabel's with no rage, only the quiet finality of a checkmate. I felt the power shift in the entire building that morning. Isabel and her new husband walked in, and the deference they once commanded had evaporated. You could feel their irrelevance. Mr. Albright gave a sharp nod to Miss Davies. I wasn't there, but I heard later there was no drama, just the surgical application of securities law. She outlined a conspiracy to defraud the company. Then Mr. Chen presented the damning financial charts, an autopsy of Isabel's secret operation. He followed the money, her bonuses, their lavish life. He showed how our vendor payments were funneled into her shell company to fund the attack. He proved they had paid for the coup with Eleanor's money. Julian's face turned crimson. Ms. Davies silenced Isabel's objections with my sworn deposition. Then our lawyer showed the forged ethics documents. The timestamps proved they were created just 3 hours after their wedding photo was released. A panicked, sloppy mistake. Isabel hadn't been securing her victory. She'd been frantically building a false alibi from a hotel room. Then Ms. Davies showed a slide from Isabel's own hard drive. The words, "phase shift," appeared on the screen. Isabel's plan in her own words. Ms. Davies coolly narrated the strategy. Use the wedding as a shock and seize Eleanor's chair. It was never about them. It was a corporate raid, and Julian was just the tool. He snapped. He stood up, pointing at Isabel, his voice breaking as he started to lie. He claimed she manipulated him, that he knew nothing of the finances. He was trying to cut her loose to save himself. It was a pathetic, futile gesture. Ms. Davies simply advanced to the final slide, a screenshot of Julian's text message, Isabel's strategy, in his words, sent from their honeymoon. The room went dead silent. The board members, men who barely acknowledged my existence, stared at Isabel with utter disgust. I heard she just sat there, buried alive by her own words. The vote was immediate and unanimous. Terminated. Stock rescinded. Credentials revoked. I watched from my desk as security walked her out of the building for the last time. The board then freed up the company's entire legal budget for Eleanor to sue them personally. But she had one last thing to announce. She had spent the morning calling the 3 major clients we had lost. After explaining the new audit controls, designed to prevent another Isabel, all 3 renewed their contracts. The crisis Isabel created to shatter Eleanor became the very stage for her to display unshakable strength. By noon, Isabel Thorne was a ghost in our system. Her contracts were void. Her name was a cautionary tale. She had gambled in empire and was now facing a future of depositions and ruin. They ended up in a cheap motel. I imagined Eleanor in the boardroom, watching the sunset, alone and in total command of the world she had built. I saw her not as the tragic figure from Isabel's script, but as the quiet architect she always was. And I understood the simple, brutal truth of my own choice. They sent that text message believing they were delivering a kill shot. Instead, they just handed my boss the authenticated, time-stamped proof she needed to lock them out forever. My story is a quiet addendum to a failed coup. Isabel's fatal error was simple. She spent years studying Eleanor's weaknesses, but never considered that the woman who ordered her coffee was paying attention.